Pallottine Mission ran an agricultural school from 1968. Here you see the living quarters for the boys that did a 2-year course at the school. For the boys it was not easy to get out of bed in the morning. Here are Graham Whitehurst and Patrick Wally getting ready for the day's activities. While we look at the boys, we can explain a bit about this school. In 1967, plans were made for a school to be set up on the Pallottine Mission for boys aged between 14 and 16. The purpose of the school was to provide for the boys who had completed primary school but perhaps would not do so well in high school. They would have an opportunity to learn some skills that may be useful in their later life. The agricultural side of the school was one way of giving a wide variety of work, and being in an agricultural area and close to the station country, setting the boys up for an opportunity for work. The living quarters for 24 boys were built in 1967. There were 6 rooms with 4 boys in each. The rector at the time was Father Eddie Weirmarker. Breakfast and all other meals were in the boys' own dining room. This setup was chosen for practical reasons. The rest of the community was not very happy about it, especially the girls. All the boys had daily duties organised before they went to school. It was on a weekly rotation. Here you see Noel Burns doing some cleaning in the shower room. Noel came from Bringo. He was a keen reader of books and very artistic. We'll catch up with him later on in the story. Gary Morrison is seen cleaning his bedroom as one of the duties. Gary was from Arano. And Chris Taylor, also from Arano, cleaning the porch to the entrance of the building. Raymond Dan is cleaning the doors of the recreation room. He was the first boy to live in the new quarters. Raymond was from Woolleen Station at that time. School started at 8:30. Here some of the boys are walking down to the school in 1970. In the first year there was no school building. Classwork was done in one of the spare bedrooms. In the early 1970s, classrooms were built and the boys walked through the old vegetable garden to get to the classrooms. The first teacher was Mr. Ian Markey. He was a teacher that knew the place well, having been at Tarden in 1962 as a primary school teacher. The old piggery on the mission was built in 1951. It had not been used for a long time. One of the first jobs of the new school was to start up the old piggery. This could generate some income for the school as well as provide work for the boys. Work has commenced on renovating the old sites. Arrangements were made to purchase 8 Berkshire mated gilts from the Christian Brothers, our neighbours. Some of the boys had to feed the pigs each day. One of the assigned tasks for the school was to look after the mission fowl. Here you see the fowl shed and Richard Nelly doing his morning duty of feeding the 200 hens before he goes to school. Richard came from Minninew in 1970. The egg production was about 100 per day. The mission could use 12 to 14 dozen per day. The boys learnt to draw up and record a graph of the daily egg production. Gary and Joseph Narrier are collecting the eggs in the afternoon and taking them to the kitchen. Joseph came from New Norcia and belonged to the first group of boys that arrived in 1968. Shearing time on the farm was always a busy time. The rounding up of the sheep was with the sheepdogs, and Cliff Ellis, who was helping Bill Meaney look after the sheep. Cliff was not part of the agricultural school. All the boys from the school participated in the sheep work during the busy time of the year. They learned to handle sheep in the yards and help with the penning up before they got shorn. The black and white dog is Tinker and was one of the best sheepdogs on the farm. At the time there were about 3,000 sheep. A lot of the boys had never worked with sheep before and had a lot to learn. Most of the boys prefer the outside work on the farm more than the class work. The classroom work commenced at 1:30 p.m. and carried on until afternoon tea at 3:30. There was normally a short break for games before informal discussion on the next day's practical work. This 32 acres of virgin land was chain-felled in 1967 by contractors. It was part of the Geraldton Diocese block of land and was north of the Pallottine property. At the time it was leased by the Geraldton Diocese to the Pallottines. Part of the contract was to clear some of the land. Almost half of the block was made up of salt lakes and clay pans and forms part of the Pindar-Tarden catchment. In 1968, under supervision, the boys burned green and dry timber, scrub raked and ploughed the land, and picked and burned a heavy infestation of roots. Stress was laid on the economic use of labour and the adjustment of fires to suit timber dryness and the weather conditions. To illustrate that not all burning needs to be destructive, a 2-acre sheep shelter belt was conservatively burned to clear it of a mass of fallen timber without destroying the living trees. All boys were successfully introduced to tractor driving. Here you see Michael Indich on the Chamberlain Countryman 6. This tractor is pulling a Chamberlain 18 disc plough. Michael also came from Arano and belonged to the first group of boys. Some of the boys do more practice than others, but Michael was okay. All boys gained experience with 2 or more tractor-drawn implements such as scrub bar, scrub rake and seeders. One boy had started using harrows. Here's Joseph Neria harvesting oats. He's driving the Chamberlain Countryman 6, pulling the PTO-driven International Harvester. It was the only time one of the boys did the harvesting. It was considered that the boys were not yet ready for operating this type of machine. The problem was not driving the tractor, but operating the complex harvester and the dangers with it, as you will see. You never do this, clearing the comb before you switch off the harvester. Joseph was one of the better operators of the machines, but he was also in the process of learning what you can do and what you're not allowed to do. Here the boys are putting the grain for feed in the bags for the pigs and fowls, as well as next year's seed. The bags are filled with grain and sewn up by Graham Whitehurst. He came from Mullewa in 1968. Ray Dan and Chris Taylor putting the bags on the truck. Led by Gavin Egan, the boys were coming back from a hard day's work. During the busy time on the farm, the boys sometimes work outside the whole day. Some work in the vegetable gardens, others work with the sheep, and others work in the paddocks on the farm. They all have to catch up with the schoolwork later on when the work is not available on the farm. While working on the farm, the boys are supervised by Brother Eddie, Brother John, and Bill Meaney, who looks after the sheep, and do the killing and butchering of the sheep for the mission meat with Cliff Ellis. It's not all work for the boys. After school, the boys play football at the back of the school. Most of the boys also played in the local football under-18 competition in Mullewa. In later years, basketball was more popular with the boys because most of them came from the north of the state. Here you see them playing a team from Rossmoyne in Perth. That was in 1977. The boys named the team and picked the colours of the uniform. The basketball singlets are white with black names and numbers. The shorts are black and the socks are black with white borders. The name of the team was Pallottines. On the 26th of March 1977, the boys won the B grade premiership at the Mullewa Amateur Basketball Association. The captain was Randall Bullen, who came from Lagrange. The vice-captain was Christopher Sampi from Lombardina. The grand final results was Pallottine 50, Tridents 49. There were celebrations after the match at the teacher's place. The boys are letting off steam on the lawn in the courtyard of the living quarters. Michael Mungu with the black shorts and Robert Farrell. This was strictly under supervision, so it did not get out of hand. Michael and Robert came from Geraldton. Violent sports like this were not normally encouraged. On Sunday mornings, Miles Gallagher took the boys to a favourite picnic spot in the small bus. This time they went to Ewan on the Greenock River. Miles was a lay missionary that, like many other volunteers, worked on the mission. He was the baker and the bus driver at the time. Stopping on the way for Roderick Thompson to see his relatives. While we travelled to the Greenock River at Ewan, north of Mullewa, with the boys from the class of 1969 and 1970, we can listen to some interesting information about this area and its long history. The Greenock River is one of the ancient rivers of this land. Fossil bones have been found at the river of the Zygomaturus trilobus. This herbivore was about the same size as a bull and equally as heavily built, standing about 1.5 metres tall at the shoulders and weighing about a tonne. It ranged widely throughout the better watered areas of southern and eastern Australia about 1.6 million to about 20,000 years ago during the Pleistocene period. This gentle giant by nature was a relative of wombats. It's quite likely that the early Aboriginals were well acquainted with this magnificent beast. Some people blame them for the animal's extinction. Others consider that the climate fluctuations which took place during the Pleistocene time were more important as factors leading to extinction of the animal. Whatever the actual reasons for their extinction, they should be seen in perspective. In the short space of 150 years, European man has almost managed to drive more species over the brink of extinction than Aboriginal man may have managed to do in 50,000 years. Clearly, some of us are much better destroyers than others. Other fossil bones have been found at the river over this time. At the end of the day, the boys are seen walking up to the dining room to have their meal. The kitchen staff prepare the meals. There were lay missionaries that gave 2 years of their life to work on a place like this, not for money, but for the love of our brothers and sisters in the world. All the boys had their meals in their own dining room. With this came a responsibility to serve the meals and pray before meals. All the boys took part on a weekly basis. Cleaning up after tea, George Simpson came from Pallottine Station. Chris Taylor cleaning the glass, and Patrick Wally sweeps the floor. For most of the boys, this would have been a new experience in their lives. Cecil alone from Mora is writing a letter home. Washing some of their own clothing was part of the daily routine. This came as a bit of a shock for some of the boys. The boys do some work after school. Here you see Noel Burns working on a leather cover. Some of them had a lot of talent. Occasionally one of the boys did some hair cutting. Ray Dan was one of the best to do this job. The boys trusted him to do a good job. It was very important for the boys to look good at that age. They certainly let him know if the job wasn't good enough. At this time, long hair was the fashion, but sometimes it had to be trimmed for safety reasons. In the recreation room, Graham and Noel play a game of drafts. Other games played included table tennis and pool. Once a week the boys were introduced to dancing by one of the staff. It was also held in the recreation room. At the end of a long day, the boys are getting ready to go to bed. Some boys do a bit of reading, while others are already asleep.